Hey everyone, I'm Shelly from the Vintage Hen and Chick, and if you love DIY trash to treasure ideas and flea market flips, you're in the right place. Today I'm sharing 3 thrifted DIY makeovers using milk paint and paint inlays, and I'll be showing simple techniques that anyone can try. So whether you're looking for thrift flip decor ideas or an easy milk paint tutorial, you're in the right place. Now let's get started. For project 1, I have this candle holder, and this baby is solid wood and heavy. And I love the way it looks. I'm not a fan of the color. I wanted to make it look more like concrete. And so how we're gonna achieve that today is I'm gonna be using Sweet Pickins milk paint in the color Cobblestone, which is from the Bespoke collection. And with milk paint, you just mix half milk paint to half warm water, and you stir it up for about 2 minutes to make sure everything gets dissolved. And then I set mine aside for about 10 minutes to let it thicken up. And I'm just taking a French tip brush and I am painting the entire candlestick holder. I'm gonna be doing 2 coats of the milk paint. You can see that the first coat is going on kind of light, but don't worry, that is totally normal. The second coat will give me full coverage. So I'm going to continue to give this 2 coats. I am going to use my blow dryer in between each coat to help speed up the drying process and also to encourage some crackling and maybe some chipping. So once I get the 2 coats done and dried, then we'll come back and move on to the next step. Here is our piece after 2 coats of the milk paint. And now I'm just gonna take my sanding sponge and I'm gonna sand the entire piece. I wanna get rid of any extra paint that's gonna chip off. Make sure that anything that's gonna kind of crackle and craze, the sanding is gonna help that. And it's also going to smooth the milk paint down beautifully. One thing about milk paint is once you sand it, you get such a buttery, smooth feeling with the milk paint. And it's also going to bring out a lot of those beautiful details on this piece that I want to highlight. So I'm going to continue to sand the entire piece until I have it looking and feeling exactly what I want. And then we're going to move on to the next step. I am done sanding the candle holder and I have some nice crackling and distressing. And so now we're also going to highlight that beautiful detail with some Dixie Belle white wax. And I am using a big sturdy wax brush and I'm loading up my brush with the wax and I'm going to apply it all over this candle holder. I want to make sure that that white wax gets nice and embedded into those grooves and into the details, because then when I come back and buff that back, that wax is going to stay in there and it's going to highlight those details and make this piece look absolutely beautiful. So I'm going to continue to apply the wax over all of the milk paint. We're going to highlight the details and seal it in at the same time. And once that's done, we're going to come back and move on to the next step. The last step in this project is to buff off the excess wax, and I'm just going to be using a dry, clean rag, and I am just buffing off all the excess wax. And you can see that that white wax is settling beautifully into the details and the grooves of this candle holder, and it's making this piece look like a beautiful piece of concrete. So I'm going to get this completely buffed off and everything, all the excess wax removed, and then this project is complete. So here's how that candle holder turned out. Can you believe that it started as just a simple thrifted piece? Now it has that aged concrete look using just milk paint and wax. I love the way it turned out. Let me know in the comments what you think. And is this a look that you would try? For project 2, I have this wooden Dutch cookie mold that I picked up at a flea market. It is vintage, but it has a lot of damage, and so I decided to give it a makeover because of the damage. And I'm gonna start out by using some milk paint on the cookie mold, and I'm gonna give it 2 good coats of Sweet Pickins creamy milk paint. And I mixed up my milk paint half and half. It's half milk paint to half water, and milk paint comes in a powdered form, and you just mix it with some warm water. And then I always let my milk paint set aside for about 10 to 15 minutes to thicken up, because you want it to be kind of the consistency of a melted milkshake. And I'm going to give the cookie mold 2, maybe 3 coats of the milk paint. That wood is dark, but I think 2 coats is gonna be enough to get the good coverage. And I chose the creamy because I like the shade of the wood and I want to see that showing up underneath that milk paint. So I'm gonna give 2 good coats of the milk paint, and then I'm gonna take my blow dryer in between each coat to dry it, to speed up the drying and also to encourage any crackling or crazing that's gonna happen with the cookie mold. And then once that's done, then we'll come back and move on to the next step. I ended up doing about 2.5 coats of the milk paint just to make sure that I got good coverage over the entire cookie mold. And I did use my blow dryer in between each coat, and you can see I have some nice crazing going on. And now I'm just going to take my 220 grit sanding sponge and I'm going to sand the entire cookie mold. Anything that's going to chip off, I don't want it to chip off, and I also want to smooth that milk paint out. And I also want to distress the edges of the cookie mold. It is an older vintage piece, and I want it to continue to look older and vintage. So I'm going to just continue to sand everything until it looks the way I want, and then we'll move on to the next step. So now I'm going to add a paint inlay to my cookie mold, and I'm going to be using a piece from the IOD Ditzy Blooms paint inlay set. I just cut out a strip of inlay that will fit right on top of my cookie mold. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my Dixie Belle clear coat in the satin finish to apply my paint inlay. Now my inspiration for this was I want the paint inlay just to sit on top of the cookie mold. I wanted the recessed areas where you would put the cookie dough, I wanted that just to be the milk paint. And so I'm just taking a small brush and I'm applying the clear coat just to the top part of the cookie mold. And then I'm gonna take my mister bottle and I'm gonna mist the paint side of the paint inlay. I want to start activating that paint on the inlay so that way when I lay it down on my mold, that paint is wet and it's going to start adhering to my cookie mold right away. So here I am just laying my piece of paint inlay down on my cookie mold, and I'm going to smooth it out a little bit with my hands. And then I'm going to take my mister bottle and mist over that inlay. And now I'm taking a dry paper towel and mopping up the excess water while I push down that inlay into that wet clear coat. So my paint inlay has dried. You can see it kind of has that opaque look and it's dried to the touch. And now I'm just going to take my mister bottle and re-wet the paint inlay. And then I'm going to take a dry paper towel and kind of press down on the inlay and mop up any of that excess water. And once I have that done, then I'm going to start on one end of the inlay and just slowly start peeling it back. And then you will see that beautiful inlay, how it has attached to that cookie mold before. And when you're removing your inlay, if you ever come to a part where it kind of is tugging and not releasing, just mist it a little bit more and that will help release it from your project piece below. And you can see I have a beautiful impression of my inlay on the cookie mold. I let my inlay completely dry before I start this step, and I am just going to take my finger sander and my 220 grit sanding sponge, and I'm going to distress that inlay a little bit. I don't want it to be so bright and vibrant. I want it to be a little bit more muted and more vintage looking. So I'll sand that a little bit, and then we'll move on to the next step. Now it's time to seal everything in, and I'm going to be using Sweet Pickins dark oil wax to seal the cookie mold in. And so I'm just going to apply one even layer of the oil wax over the entire cookie mold. And then once I have it all applied, then I'm going to set it aside for about 15 minutes. I like to really let the oil wax absorb into that milk paint and really accentuate all the crackling and any of the details that's on this cookie mold, because there are a lot. So once I get the oil wax applied, I'll set it aside for about 15 minutes, and then we'll move on to the final step in this project. I let my oil wax absorb into the project for about 15 minutes, and now all that's left to do is take a dry paper towel or a dry rag and buff off the excess wax. Get really good into the grooves of the cookie mold. I want to make sure that there's no standing oil wax in there, and that's it. I'm simply wiping off the excess oil wax, and then this project is complete. Here's how that vintage cookie mold turned out. The milk paint and a paint inlay gave it a whole new look. Still vintage looking, but better, I think. I'd love to know what you think, so drop a comment and tell me if you'd try something like this on a thrifted find. For project 3, I have this vintage metal bunt pan that has some rust and patina on there, and I love the way that looks, and I didn't want to cover that up with paint, so I'm going to try something completely different that I have not done before, and I'm going to be adding a paint inlay to the bare metal, and I'm going to be using some pieces of inlay from the IOD Spring Melody inlay set. And I cut out my pieces, they are roses, and I'm going to be applying them with my Dixie Belle Clear Coat Satin Top Coat. And like I said, I've never done this before, so this is all an experiment. So we're going to see together how this turns out. So I'm just figuring out where I want my pieces of inlay to go, and then I'm going to apply a healthy coat of my top coat where my inlay is going to go in the bunt pan. And then I'm going to take my mister bottle and I'm going to mist the paint inlay on the paint side of the inlay, and then lay it paint side down into my clear coat on the bunt pan. And because this is metal and it's slippery, I want to make sure that I'm not smearing that inlay around on the bunt pan. So I misted the back of the inlay once I had it laid down with my mister bottle, and then I used a dry paper towel to push that inlay into the metal and mop up any excess water that is on the top of the inlay. So I'm going to continue to do that for all 4 pieces of the inlay that I'm adding to this bunt pan, and then I'm going to let it completely dry, and then we'll come back to the next step where we reveal how this experimental project turns out. So I've let my inlays dry. You can see that they have kind of an opaque look to them and they are dry to the touch. And now we are going to remove the inlays and see how everything looks. And so I'm just going to mist the inlays with my mister bottle and then take my dry paper towel, mop up any excess water that is on the inlay. And then I'm just going to start from one side of the inlay and start peeling it back and see what kind of results we have. And as you can see, my paint inlay did attach to my metal bunt pan below, and I think it turned out really nice. So I'm going to continue to mist the rest of the inlay pieces in the exact same way, misting them so they release from the pan, and then starting from one side and just slowly peeling back that inlay. It's time to seal the paint inlays in, and I did let them dry completely because I don't want to smear the inlays as I'm sealing them in. And I'm going to be using my Dixie Belle clear coat in the satin finish. And anytime that I seal a paint inlay in using a brush, I like to load up my brush heavily with the product and then use a light hand as I'm going over the inlays. Because like I mentioned, you can run the risk of smearing that paint, and I don't want that to happen. So I'm just gonna seal the entire inside part of the bunt pan with my satin clear coat. And then once that's done, this project is complete. Here's how that vintage bunt pan turned out. I experimented with paint inlays on this one, and I love the sweet vintage look it has now. It would look so nice hung on a vintage gallery wall. Let me know in the comments if you'd try something like this or where you display it in your home. Thanks so much for watching and hanging out with me today. And if you enjoyed these projects, leave a comment and hit subscribe. I share new DIY thrift flips every single week, and I'll be back next week with more ideas to inspire your next project. See you then.